Quecreek Flooded Mine Rescue. On July 24, 2002, 9 miners were digging coal 240 feet below a quiet farm in Pennsylvania. Their maps showed an old abandoned mine nearby, but safely far away. The maps were wrong. Just after 9 p.m., their cutting machine chewed through a wall of coal, and the wall exploded. Behind it lay the old mine, which had been silently filling with water for 50 years. Millions of gallons of freezing black water burst into the tunnels. One of the miners grabbed the mine phone and screamed a warning. A second crew of 6 men heard it, dropped everything, and raced the water through the dark. Those 6 barely made it out alive. The 9 men who broke the wall never had a chance to run. The flood chased them uphill through the tunnels until they reached the highest pocket of the mine. Then the water rose to their chests and stopped, with nowhere left to go. The air was 55 degrees and the water was colder. In that freezing darkness, the 9 men made a decision that still gives people chills. They tied themselves together with rope. If they lived, they would live together. If they died, they would be found together and brought home to their families. On the surface, engineers made a desperate plan. They drilled a 6-inch hole down into the pocket where they hoped the men were trapped. Then they pumped hot, high-pressure air down the hole. The pressure did 2 jobs at once. It warmed the freezing men, and it pushed the water back like an invisible wall. Next, a massive drill began cutting a rescue shaft wide enough for a human body. Then, halfway down, the drill bit snapped. For 18 hours, the rescue stopped dead while crews fished the broken bit out of the hole. Below, the 9 men sat roped together in the dark, listening to the drilling, and then to the silence. They had no food, and hypothermia was slowly winning. After 77 hours underground, they heard the drill punch through above their heads. A narrow yellow rescue capsule came down the shaft. One by one, the men rode it up through 240 feet of rock. At 2:45 in the morning, the last miner reached the surface. The rescuers said 2 words that became famous across America. 9 for 9. Every single man survived because when the water came, they refused to face it alone. Sago Mine False Hope Tragedy. On January 2nd, 2006, 13 miners rode into the Sago mine in West Virginia to start the New Year's first shift. Deep inside the mine, a sealed-off section was quietly filling with explosive gas. That morning, a violent thunderstorm rolled over the hills above. Investigators believe a lightning strike ignited the gas. The explosion tore through the tunnels like a bomb. 1 miner near the blast was killed instantly. The other 12 survived the explosion itself, but the blast had filled the mine with something worse than fire. Carbon monoxide, a poison you cannot see, smell, or taste. The 12 men retreated deeper and did what they were trained to do. They hung a heavy curtain across the tunnel to hold the poison air out. Then they sat down behind it, tapped on the roof bolts, and waited for rescue. As the hours passed and the air grew worse, the men took out scraps of paper. They wrote letters to their families. One of them wrote, "Tell all I will see them on the other side." And then, "It wasn't bad, I just went to sleep." On the surface, hundreds of family members packed into the little Sago Baptist Church to wait. Rescue teams crawled into the poisoned mine, foot by foot, for 41 hours. Then, close to midnight, a miracle seemed to arrive. A message from the rescue team was overheard, and it sounded like 12 men were alive. The word raced up the hill to the church. The bells rang out into the night. Families wept, hugged, and sang hymns of thanks. For 3 hours, the whole town celebrated a miracle. But inside the command center, the officials knew something was wrong. The message had been garbled, misheard in the chaos. At 3 in the morning, the mine company walked into the church with the truth. 12 of the men were dead. Only 1 was still breathing. Randall McCloy, the youngest man on the crew, was carried out in a coma. Doctors could not explain how he had survived the same air that killed the others. He woke weeks later and slowly walked back into his life with his wife and 2 children. The town of Sago buried 12 men that January, and America learned the cruelest lesson about hope. Never ring the bells until the men walk out of the ground. Beaconsfield Rock Fall Survival. On April 25, 2006, 3 miners were working a kilometer underground in the Beaconsfield gold mine in Tasmania, Australia. Todd Russell and Brant Webb stood inside a steel work basket, fixing mesh to the tunnel roof. Their workmate Larry Knight operated the machine that held them up. At 9:26 p.m., a small earthquake rippled through the rock. A kilometer of mountain shrugged, and the tunnel came down. Tons of rock buried the machine and everything around it. Larry Knight was killed in the collapse. Todd and Brant should have died with him. Instead, the steel basket they stood in held, barely. The rock crushed down around it, sealing them inside a space the size of a car boot. They could not stand, and they could barely turn over. Above them, the whole country assumed all 3 men were dead. For 5 days, the 2 men lay in the crushed basket in total darkness. They survived on the only food they had, a single muesli bar from Brant's pocket. They licked the water that seeped down through the broken rock. On the 5th day, a rescue team pushed close enough to hear something impossible. Voices began coming out of the rock. Both men were alive, and the rescue became a race watched by all of Australia. But the rock around them was shattered and alive with pressure. One blast of explosives could bring the whole tunnel down on them. So the rescuers pushed a narrow pipe through to the trapped men first. Down that pipe came fresh water, food, letters from their families, even music players. Then the real work began. The rescuers had to grind through some of the hardest rock on Earth. By hand, meter by meter. Too close for explosives, they chewed forward with a grinding machine and hand tools. Every meter took hours, and the trapped men could hear every scrape. Day after day, the tunnel crept toward the basket. On the 14th day, a rescuer's hand finally broke through. Todd and Brant crawled out of the hole that had nearly become their grave. They refused the stretchers. They walked to the mine lift, rode it up into the sunrise, and stepped out on their own legs. In front of the cameras, both men reached up and clocked off their shift tags. 14 days late. Australia cheered for the 2 who came back. And it stood silent for Larry Knight, the one man the mountain kept. Copiapo 33 miners, 69-day entrapment. On August 5th, 2010, deep in Chile's Atacama Desert, the San Jose mine began to groan. Then, with a roar heard for miles, the mountain collapsed on itself. A single block of stone twice the weight of the Empire State Building sealed the tunnels. Trapped beneath it, 700 meters underground, were 33 men. They gathered in a small emergency shelter carved into the rock. Inside, they found food meant to last 2 or 3 days. Their shift leader, Luis Urzua, made the decision that would save them all. Every 48 hours, each man would eat 2 spoonfuls of tuna and drink a sip of milk. Nothing more. Above them, rescue drills began probing the mountain, completely blind. Each borehole was a needle searching for men in a haystack of solid rock. Days passed, then weeks, with no sound and no sign of life. The world quietly began to assume that all 33 men were dead. The miners could hear the drills grinding somewhere in the rock, always missing them. On the 17th day, a drill finally broke through into their tunnel. When the drillers pulled the bit back to the surface, something was taped to it, a note written in red letters. "We are well in the refuge," mocked the 33. Chile erupted with joy. All 33 men were alive, but they were still buried under 700 meters of rock. Through the narrow borehole, rescuers lowered supply capsules the miners called doves. Down came food, water, medicine, letters from home, and even a tiny video camera. NASA flew in to advise on keeping the men sane in their buried world. 3 giant drills attacked the mountain in a race. Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Each one had to cut a shaft wide enough for a human body through solid rock. For 2 months, the men lived, worked, and prayed a half-mile underground. On day 66, Plan B broke through into the tunnel. A rescue capsule, painted in Chile's colors and named the Phoenix, was lowered down the shaft. 1 man at a time climbed inside for a 15-minute ride up through the rock. On October 13th, the first miner rose out of the ground into the desert night. 1 billion people around the world watched it live. One by one, 32 more followed. The last man to leave the mine was Luis Urzua, the leader who had rationed the tuna. He had been buried alive for 69 days. He stepped out of the capsule and told the president, "I hand you the shift all 33 accounted for. No one in history has survived longer, deeper, or more watched.